så kan du sagtens nå.
Okay, so now we are starting, and please welcome Klaus Agnoletti. I hope that's the way.
Yeah, whatever. I'm not
Otherwise-
Italian, so pronounce it any way you want.
You can do it better yourself, maybe. And Klaus is going to talk about hacking information security maturity assessment.
Yeah. Well, first of all, about the title. My experience from last year was I had 2 talks, and the first talk had hacking twice in the title, so I figured by putting hacking in the title as well, I would draw a crowd. I don't know if I succeeded in doing that. My name is Klaus. I've worked with IT security since 2004. I have a lot of fancy certificates, and I've worked with a lot of companies, and that's about it. First of all, since we're being recorded, I want to have a little disclaimer, not that I'm saying anything controversial, at least that's not my intention, but whatever I say is my own personal opinion, and it has nothing to do with any former, current, or future employer. Yeah. First of all, I will be talking about how I see the state of information security, primarily in Denmark, because in Denmark that's where I live and that's where I work. Then I want to talk about how I think security assessments should be rethought, because I see a lot of companies out there selling security assessments that I don't really think are very effective. By doing that, I want to tell you a little bit about this critical cybersecurity controls, or the SIS-20 controls, as they're also called, and what you can do to do with them to extend them a little bit, maybe, and to give you a good assessment or a good view of how our company's security is. Then I want to talk to you about what do you do with those results, because one thing is that you live at a company and you can see everything is a piece of shit, so, pardon my French, but you need to tell that to someone, so they can address it and give you some money so you can do something about it. And how do you do that? Exactly. How do you present in a way that management understands? First of all, I want to tell you about who I intend to give this talk to. If you work at a company and you care about security, and you can see that things aren't really very good in that sense in your company, and you want to do something about it, maybe you have even tried talking to a boss and that really didn't help. Well, then you've come to the right place. First, as I said, as I see the state of security in Denmark and the companies where I used to see two situations. I see 2 scenarios. The first one is, it's all crap. Nobody patches anything. Network isn't segmented. Nothing is hardened. Everybody are local admins, and the number of domain admins is at least twice as the number of the total people in IT. And maybe they've even had ransomware outbreaks a lot of times, and nothing has really happened. That's scenario number 1. Scenario number 2, that is if a company actually has a security governance department, they have a CISO, they're being audited, and they have a governance department where focus is on auditing that. So whenever the auditor comes around, he looks at governance, how things are supposed to be, but they don't really look at IT, because IT is something different. People in IT don't understand security, and the people in governance don't understand IT. So whenever you start digging a little bit, if you start vulnerability scanning, for instance, you'll see everything is crap anyway. So unfortunately, that's what I see. I hope that someday I'll be seeing something else, but I haven't so far. Yeah. Well, but how should you assess security the right way? Well, first of all, you should look at the whole picture. And at the whole picture, I see, look at people, look at process, look at technology. Don't just look at one, because then you have failed. And what usually happens is that the people and the process bugs are being audited, that's it. Because if you're looking at ISO 27001, that only looks at people. We have a security culture framework that measures people's awareness states, so to speak. That's also also just people. ISO 27002 that looks at processes. But then we have COBIT, we have the SIS-20 controls, we have ITIL, we have, well, cloud hosting. Well, that's technology. And we have a lot of other technologies down here. Yeah, if you want to look at the technology specifically, there are benchmarks, there are the sticks, hardening guidelines, whatever. Vendors probably also have guidelines, and you can look at those. Yeah, well, how do you look at the entire picture? Well, first of all, I'll start off by talking about the SIS-20 controls, and by supplementing them with specific ways of assessing the core technologies of the company, like Active Directory, like the network, and how they're yeah. Then if you want to make it a little bit more advanced, so to speak, if you want to look at root causes rather than just finding symptoms, because that's what the SIS-20 is good at, then you can pull in some ISO stuff. But I'm not going to talk very much about ISO, because there are a lot of people who knows much more about that than I do. Well, this the SIS critical security controls, as they're called, or the SIS-20 controls. In my mind, it provides an easy way to get started with security, and it can also help you compare what you do in your company to what is considered best practice. It's very operational. It has, as the name suggests, it has 20 prioritized control domains, and it's free to use, which is good. The way the critical controls comes about is that some smart people in the US has looked at a lot of security cyber attacks, and then they have sort of turned it around to see which controls can we actually implement in order to make these cyber attacks go away, and that's what the 20 controls are about. Yeah, I have them there. You probably can't read it, and that's actually not the point. Control number 1. That's the first control you want to start with. That's called inventory of authorized and unauthorized devices. To put it another way, if you don't know what you have, then you can't secure it. If you don't know what hardware you have. Control number 2 is the same thing just for software. If you don't know what software you have, well, how can you control it? Control number 20. That's called the penetration test and red team exercise. That means this is the last thing you're going to do, because it doesn't make sense to spend, I don't know, 200,000-300,000 kroner on whatever on a penetration test when you know you're going to fail, when you don't patch anything, you don't secure anything, you don't do anything. I mean, what's the point? So that's the whole idea. Do first thing first, and whenever you think you're secure, do some of the more advanced stuff, like testing, for instance, testing that you have something that works. I'll be focusing. Oh, sorry, later on. Yeah, each control has a number of sub-controls, and all control has a why is this critical at all? And all sub-controls, they are marked as foundational or advanced, basic stuff and the more advanced stuff, of course. And there are even guidance on how to implement the controls. The SIS-20 controls are very technical focused, the goal is that all 20 controls should be implemented just by primarily doing technical stuff. So that's where the focus is. And it even has KPI suggestions, meaning how do you measure how good you are at doing each control. Yeah, and I have links. In the end, I will giving you the URL to the slide set, so you can take a look at it yourself and look at the links also. Yeah. Well, how do you use the SIS-20 controls? The way I use them in my work is a combination of interviews and technology workshops, and then flavored with a bunch of relevant technical tests, focusing on the technologies, the core technologies in the company. Then for each control, I sort of give them a score based on the CMMI scale. If you don't know it, it's a scale ranging from 1 to 5, where 1 is, well, not completely bad, because then I give them a 0, and up to 5, which is completely automated controls that that will get better over time. They even have a process for doing that, stuff like that. That's very advanced. And usually when I do this SIS 20 assessment, I involve IT management. I want them to be in the room where the IT people say how things are, because sometimes there are some eye-opening experiences going on. I mean, like the CISO thinking things are in one way, but in fact they're not. For instance, that's the most common scenario, and that's a good thing. I'll be focusing on the top 5 control for the rest of the speak. Top 5 control, at least SIS says so, that by implementing those 5 controls, you'll be reducing your risk of getting a cyber attack or whatever by 80% compared to doing nothing at all. So the five first controls, they are the most important. So I'll be focusing on a bit more on them and talking about how I use them, and also I'll talk about how I recommend using them in real life assessments. Yes, as I said, this is the first control: inventory of authorized and unauthorized devices. The sub-control says something about having automated tools that discovers whenever you put something on a network, it'll pop up an alarm, for instance. And it says something about DHCP logs and blah, blah. They're very operational, which is a good thing, but also a bad thing, because if the company is very, very immature, then it doesn't really matter how they do. I mean, for instance, sub-control 1.2 says use the HTTP log to improve asset inventory. Well, it doesn't really matter how specifically they do it. I usually, when it's very immature companies, I look at the essence of the control, seeing what are they trying to accomplish. Well, they're trying to accomplish that somehow when you put something on the network, it'll be detected, and you can't put something on a network that IT doesn't know about. That's the whole point. So how I do this in an assessment, for instance, I will do a ping sweep test. That will give me a list of devices on the network, and I'll talk to IT about that. See, is there anything on the list that they don't know? For instance, if there are, well, then we have a problem. If I ask them if they have a control and to do this, and they say, well, we don't, well, that's also a problem. So, yep. The same thing just for software. I use on this talk I'll be focusing what I see out there, and what I see out there is Windows. So that's why I'll be asking IT, well, local admin, are users local admins? Because if they are, then they have failed the test already, because then the user can install whatever they want and nobody knows about anything. Yeah, and similarly, I will be doing some kind of PowerShell tool or something that gives me a list of all the stuff that's being installed on computers, and I'll talk to IT and say, well, is all this on the list of software that you have approved? Control number 3 is secure configuration for basically everything but network equipment. So what I would do in a real life situation is that I'd start talking to IT. Do we have baseline implemented at all? Because usually they don't. And if they say they have, well, then we can always test if that's the case. SIS, who does the top 20 controls, they also have what they call SIS benchmarks, which is hardening guides for Windows and a lot of different other stuff. So you can always test and see if they have done that. And again, there are a number of very concrete sub-controls, which has good and bad things. On these first 5 controls, all the controls are foundational, more or less. That's what DF says. That's what should be implemented in order to implement the 20 controls. Number 4, this is vulnerability assessment and remediation. I usually never see this out there. If they have a scanning process, well, then nobody really looks at the report, and nobody really does anything about it. So this is a two or three step process. First of all, somebody has to make sure that updates to whatever's installed on the computer get pushed out. There's a process for that. Then there should be a process for scanning everything on the network, vulnerability scanning, see if this control actually works. Is everything being updated? Do we have anything that hasn't been updated and where security is really bad? And then when they have scanning results, somebody has to do something about it. Meaning, somebody in IT needs to actually, first of all, patch things. They need to make sure everything is configured, because that's vulnerability management also. That's not just patching, but also configuring. Yeah, and basically that's what the subcontrol says. A fun fact, if you can call it that. The single biggest cause of successful malware attacks, at least in 2006 and 16, they're caused by these guys over here. As you can see, there's a lot of Adobe going on, like Flash, PDF, Shockwave. Internet Explorer is also very well on the list. And the fun thing about this is that most of these has already been patched at the time of exploitation. So it's just a matter of nobody installing an update. Control number 5. Controlled use of administrative privileges, meaning, well, does people have the administrative privileges they need and nothing else? Meaning, for instance, Windows administrators are they all domain administrators, for instance, because they shouldn't be. So usually when I have to when I assess this control, I look at the Active Directory, because that's what our customers have, and nobody, I repeat, nobody knows how to do it securely. If you want to, you can do a password analysis to see. One thing is that you set a password policy, but the password policy is a state of time or whatever. That can be changed any time. So by doing a password analysis, by cracking all passwords, you can actually see if there are some badly configured passwords on some users. Yeah, as I said, I focus on AD because that's where literally everybody screws up. And if you do the assessment too, you should also focus on that, because I mean, if a hacker gets in there and gets to be domain admin, well, then he has access to all data in the company probably. Yeah. Just to sum up the 20 controls, it's very practical, technical. It measures actual controls. It helps companies or whoever uses it to prioritize their efforts, because, as I said, focus on the first 5. It's based on empirical data on actual attacks. It's not like the ISO and COVID, where a lot of people who may or may not know terribly much about IT security has to agree on something, and that can take like forever. With the 20 controls, they usually make a major update every once a second year. As I said before, if maturity is really low, don't take all the sub-controls too literal, because that will only mess you up. Look at the essence of the control and see how well that is being done. Yeah, so you're not messing a paper tiger by using the 20 controls. But yeah, the 20 controls are really good at finding symptoms, but not root causes. I mean, if the organization is bad, if IT doesn't or security doesn't have any money or anything like that, the 20 controls won't find out that, but maybe that is the real problem. So if you have problems like that, you could use the ISO and do an assessment towards that. It's not a silver bullet. You still have, as a company, you have to find your own business risk, your own threats, and assess them yourself. You can outsource that. And also, The 20 controls, that's very much focused on technology, but not human security awareness, for instance. It's there. It's control number 18 or something like that. So it's not very. They don't consider that to be very important. I don't agree in that. I mean, no technical solution can ever save you from users who really doesn't get it, and there's a lot of those out there. Yeah. Well, that was the SIS-20 controls. But on top of that, I also do an assessment on key security key security technologies. For instance, like workstations. That's these days that's the firewall, so to speak. That's the first line of defense from malware. I also usually look at VMware, Hyper-V, whatever they're using, because if they're using it, 95% at least of their servers are virtualized. And if they don't secure that, well, then what? Active Directory, as I said before, designing and maintaining a secure Active Directory, that's not trivial. There's so many things to screw up, and people do. Network components, yeah, maybe they have a perimeter firewall so that you can't so you can't attack them from the outside, but internally they probably don't have anything. They're probably not segmented at all. This means that if ransomware gets inside to the network, well, then it's all over the place and you're screwed. So, yeah. Well, how do you assess the technologies? Well, what I usually do is that I Google. I ask to see if the vendor has some kind of hardening guide, and most vendors has, and that's usually a really good starting point. For instance, the VMware. VMware has a really thorough and really operational hardening guide on how to secure your environment if you're an ordinary company or if you're the NSA. They have more security levels, and they tell you exactly what you should do to harden your VMware or your vSphere environment. So they're really good. And not to mention Active Directory, Microsoft has a lot of design documents telling you how to design your Active Directory securely. They have a lot of documents telling you how to administer your AD securely. They even have guidelines telling you exactly how to set up the workstation that you're accessing, the jump post that you're using to administer the Active Directory. Very, very thorough, very, very operational. Because the big problem with Active Directory is that the way people or the way Windows administrators are using it is that first of all, the domain administrators, which they shouldn't be, but that's the easiest thing, so that's what they are. They use this domain admin credentials on all computers on the network, even their own workstations. And that means that if their own workstation get compromised, then the hacker is domain admin just like that. So and we don't want we want to avoid that. So that's why for Microsoft says that you should have special dedicated workstation, and you should have special dedicated servers that you connect to from the secure from the secure servers. The secure workstations, because you don't want the scenario to happen, as I described before. Yeah, but no one seems to know all this fantastic documentation by Microsoft, which is a shame. Network components. Well, depending on your vendor, they probably also have some hardening guidelines. CIS has something, at least for Cisco, I think. I don't know how much else they have. Segmentation. It's not really as such a technology assessment like that, because I don't want to use the tool to review firewall rule, for instance. I want to talk to the firewall admin or the network admin and get them to tell me how the network is designed, and then we'll take it from there. And that's more or less a manual thing. But as a starting point, well, first of all, servers should be separated from workstations, and if they have more branch offices, they shouldn't be like completely connected, because nobody in one branch office has any real need to talk directly to a workstation at another branch office, for instance. And also, if they're really good, or if it's possible, some switches has this possibility to put every workstation on a separate VLAN so that they can intercommunicate, which is a good thing, because if ransomware gets into a network, then it can propagate if you do this. So That's some of the things I look at when I look at segmentation. You also want to do a vulnerability scanning, because a vulnerability scanning tells you if things are patched. It tells you if you're using crap old servers, and it also tells you if they're configured correctly. So that's a really easy test to do, and it tells you so much. And cloud services, yeah. The problem with cloud services is that they are very, very easy to implement. So they can be implemented outside of IT, and if that's being done, nobody knows what, sorry, pardon my French, what hell is on it, how it's being secured, if it's being secured, who knows? Yeah, sorry. And vendors usually has some kind of guideline to hardening. Microsoft again are really good at preparing a lot of documentation and built-in tools if you have the right licenses for their products, which are of course expensive, but they do it at least. Yeah. Well, how do we come from this to this? And this is, yeah. Well, this is a prioritized action plan, where you fix all the easy stuff that has a big impact first, and then all the rest later on. Yeah. First of all, be realistic. If maturity is low, there's no reason to talk about all 20 controls. There's no reason to talk about ISO and advanced stuff. Talk about the 5 first controls, and prioritize on easy fixes with high impact. Because the good thing about having a really bad security is that it doesn't really take much to be better. It becomes much harder once you have a decent security level. And then management. Well, management decides how and when, and you provide the input. The management needs to know what it costs. Management needs to know how will it mitigate what risk if we do that, and what could we save if we do it, and what order should things be fixed in. That's basically what they need to know. They need to know how does this technical vulnerability map into the business and the business risks. If this technical vulnerability isn't fixed, well, then it may have an impact on our business, and that costs money, and we don't want that. And that's what management wants to know, because management, in the end of the day, they think of one thing and one thing only. Well, management, as I said, they're from a different planet, literally, perhaps I think. Because as a security professional on a technical level, you think very different from them. To you, as a normal human being, sorry, you think security comes naturally. You do it just because you can. You do it just because you should. To management, it only makes sense if it pays off. So security is very much about communication. If management doesn't understand what business risk this technical thing does something against, then it's not going to happen. Also, management don't like to feel dumb, because of course they aren't dumb. They're different. So if you talk about tech stuff, dumb it down. Pardon me for calling it that. It's not like you should be talking to them like they're 2 years old, but just don't talk too much tech talk, because then they feel stupid, and then you don't get any money. The more they understand, the more likely they are to listen. That makes sense. And of course, as I said before, management needs to know what does it cost. Yeah. When companies are really low on IT security, they usually see IT specifically and IT security in general as a cost, and they see it as a cost that has to be cut down. It has to be as cheap as possible to run IT and IT security. It's your job to try to make them think differently about security. To make them think of security as an insurance. I mean, if IT goes down, so does business. And as I said before, management don't want business to go down. Maybe security can be a business enabler. It ensures that IT is always available, because availability, that's also security. And in that way, the company can make money and have a lot of more customers, but of course, depending on what they're actually doing. It can also be a competitive factor, because I've seen this a little bit when people come to me and ask me, what about the GDPR, as we talked about before. Our customers has start asking about the GDPR So we need to do something. So security is slowly starting to become a competitive factor. And one thing that's very important when you communicate security to management is that if you know what's important to the business, then then the vulnerabilities you assess should be addressed, mapped to those both to those business concerns. Meaning, for instance, that if you have a lot of old servers that aren't patched, well, then the servers might go down, and if the servers go down, that will influence business, and that will mean downtime to business, and that costs money. Pardon? Asphalt? Oh, yeah, exactly. Asphalt. Yeah, exactly. I'll be talking a little bit about that. Yeah. To low IT security maturity companies, as I said, it has to be as cheap as possible. So that also means that it's an uphill battle. It's not going to be easy for you to make security better in your company, and also you can't do that alone. But that's another case. But thanks to ransomware and CEO fraud, this is changing. Actually, that is one of the single best piece of awareness that's going on. That's all the ransomware attacks. So thank you very much for that. As I said before, all enterprises fear the cost of a mass style attack, and well, there's no reason to tell your management that the mask wasn't ransomware, but that's another thing. Just to give you a feeling of what I mean, I will go through a very simple assessment of a really low maturity company. I will be coming up with some conclusions and some recommendations. Don't take that too literally. Your mileage may vary. First of all, you do the top 5 assessment. By interviewing, you will do a simple vulnerability scanning. Then, when you have some results, you will make a simple report. C-level loves report that are simple and easy to understand. I mean, that means few words, funky spiderwebs, they love that. Precise cost estimates and funky colors. That's what you want to do. When you present your conclusion, you assess risk and impact to business, as I said before. Base your assessment on what you know business cares about. And along with the bad news, you also provide them with a solution, because this is the key to everything. You say something bad, you come up with a solution. Management says thank you, you get money, everything's good. That's at least my plan. When you perform the assessment, if you don't know the answer to all the questions yourself, find someone who does. Just arrange like a small half-hour meeting with them or something like that. Since we know maturity is low, there's no reason to go into sub-controls and all that stuff that I talked about before. Yeah, this is what I would be talking about. For instance, like on control number 1, inventory of authorized and unauthorized devices. I'll just ask IT. Well, do you have anything? Do you have a sort of inventory, like a list, an Excel sheet, or whatever, of devices on your network? And also, the next thing I would ask about is that would IT find out if I put something on the network, for instance, my own computer or an access point? Do they have anything automated? The second control, inventory of authorized and unauthorized software. I would simply ask them, do you have a list of software that's allowed to install on your workstations? Because, I mean, that's not a bulletproof control, but that's some sort of indication, at least. Secure configuration, control number 3. I would simply ask them, well, do you know this vendor's hardening guidelines that I have downloaded? Have you seen this before? Are you using it? And if you are, I would probably go through a few to control and ask them, do you have this implemented? Control number 4, which is vulnerability scanning. Do you perform a vulnerability scanning on a regular basis, and what do you do with the results? Yeah. Control number 5, for instance, the administrative privileges. The first thing I would ask is, are users local admins? As I said before, that's a really important thing. And also, I would dig into how many admins has permanent membership of the main admin group and enterprise admin groups on the AD, and also user access to network shares, are they limited as much as they need to? Because one of the easiest things to address these days are ransomware attacks. So I figured that's what we will be reporting in this report, that everything sucks, and one of the things they could do is to limit access to network drive, because that's one of the things that I usually never see either. I mean, granting permissions on a Windows network, that can be done easily, or that can be done so that you have an overview of who has access to what, but I have never seen it done in practice. Usually it's just a big pile of weird permissions that nobody knows anything about. Yeah, the vulnerability scanner. I would use OpenBAS. That's part of Kali Linux, and it's free, so use that. I would perform what is called an authenticated scan. That means that the vulnerability scanner can log into the computer and do some local tests to find out exactly how are the computer configured, what is installed, all that stuff. Basically, you want to scan everything. You want to scan workstations, servers, network devices, appliances, to get a big overview. And also, an important thing is that whenever you plan to do the scan, please talk to someone about it, because you don't want somebody in IT or even somebody on the C level to get pissed because something goes down when you start scanning. That happens occasionally for anyone. Yep, this is the report. Not surprisingly, I've talked to IT. All 5 controls, they suck. Everything is red. I even have a little legend so they could see, well, it could have been a different color, but it's not. All right. This is the initial result. What does this mean? Well, the conclusion. This should be on top of the report. The conclusion is that the level of IT security controls are consistently non-existent. Yeah. So and as I said before, we want to talk about ransomware. So the risk is that this increases the risk of workstations and servers getting attacked by ransomware. And well, up until now, it's mostly gibberish to your management. So you want to tell them, well, what's the business impact of this? And that is what I've written here is that a ransomware attack would likely make all data on network shares unavailable, putting us out of business for at least the time it takes to restore. Worst case, since we don't know that know if our backup works, then we could be out of business, because maybe potentially we don't have a backup because nobody has tested it. That is more or less the conclusion. Next section of the report is action plan. I've decided to put that into 2 parts. One part is immediately, what should we do right now, and what should we do a little bit later on. Right now, we want to put out the fire, so we want to patch everything. We want to segment the network a little bit, as I talked about before. We want to separate things as much as possible, so that if something comes into our network, it can propagate. And also, we want to lock down user access to shares. Next part of the action plan is implement the 5 controls, of course, so that we get a little bit more in control of what is going on. Investigate technical anti-malware controls like a web proxy, secure DNS, network intrusion detection systems that can look for weird traffic on the network, sandboxing, sandboxing malware filters. Educate users. Users need to know how to avoid infecting their PC, and also IT needs to be educated as well, because if you get a ransomware on your computer, the user needs to know what he or she should do. Secondly, IT personnel or whoever's in help desk, they need to know what to do if somebody calls them up and says, I have ransomware, because when that happens, seconds matter. You need to do something as fast as possible. So you have to create a plan. What IT should do whenever that call comes, like logging down network shares, access, or whatever. Make everything read-only, something like that. And since we don't know what's going on with the backup, we need to make sure, first of all, the right data is backed up and we can restore it. That is also pretty basic. And so in terms of cost, well, there's bad and good news. Of course, I won't put that in the report. The bad news is that we don't know exactly what it will cost because we simply don't have an overview. But the good thing is that I, as an employee, has done the assessment. I'm already employed, so it would be relatively neutral in terms of cost to get started, to get an overview of things. One thing you should remember if you put yourself in this situation is that you can't do it alone. You need management to think it's a good idea, and also and if management think it's a good idea that should be invested money in, well then they would hire someone else. They would hire like a responsible for IT security. For instance, they would make security policies, all the right stuff. But we're not talking about that now. We're talking about raising CEOs' awareness to security just a little bit. Yeah, this is what I told you. This is I told you how I think things are when I'm at clients. I've told you how I think you should rethink or think of security assessment. I've told you about this 20 controls. I've told you about assessing technologies, how you prioritize your results, how you create a roadmap, and how you address your findings to management. Yep. Any questions? Yes?
Yeah, I'm a developer. And one thing you...
Oh, yeah, we need a mic, sorry.
Sorry about that. Yeah, well, my question is about build servers, because I'm a developer, and what I often experience is that in the operations department, there usually are quite clever guys, and they would really like to do all the stuff that you mentioned, right? They just don't have the time for it.
No.
And at the same time, you don't have automated deploy, and you don't have a very mature development department or something like that, right? So how do you see automated deploy? Build servers that actually can do everything, but of course it's locked, so it's not a user, right? And that security gap. Because in some way, even though I don't believe in a silver bullet, then I still see that as the silver bullet to free up the skilled operation guys.
Yeah, and that is the key to this 20 controls, that automate everything. So I think in terms of build servers, I would say you should control access to whoever has access to the code right into the coded process. I don't know that terribly much about it, so I'm not going to say anything that could be stupid. but you say something very important. You say the developers don't have time. That's what I addressed before. That is that management needs to be involved. Management needs to buy in on this. And the same thing with Windows administrators. If they're going to work like Microsoft says they should, well, that is completely different, and it may take more time. But they can't do it if management don't approve of it. In terms of security, I would probably look at the OWASP top 10 controls. I don't know if you know that, but OWASP is an open free organization who has made a list of the 10 most critical errors in security when it comes to web security, at least, and also on mobile development. And just go through that, or tell them about it, and says, well, these are really good controls that you should look at. It even has implementation guides on how to program securely. And then there is Microsoft Secure Development Lifecycle. That's a complete framework that describes how you should develop securely, made by Microsoft. Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually not the developers that don't have time in my world. It is the operation guys.
Okay.
It's just the reason that they don't have time is because they get nagged down by, for instance, deploying manually stuff that developers have made and such, right? Yeah, it's more like that. But yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Well, I hope that I said something that you can use, even though I don't really know that much about it. Right? Yes.
You seem to be focusing quite a lot on ransomware and viruses. Are you afraid that will take focus away from other security aspects?
Well, I do that for two reasons. The first reason is that it's very easy to tell your CEO about the risk from ransomware, because he is, if he hasn't tried it himself, his wife probably has, or his mother or his father has probably tried having it. So everybody knows what that is. And if you try to do something about ransomware, it will automatically do something else about the overall security level. So, well, of course you're right. There are other things in the world, but ransomware is on the rise. I mean, in my mind, we haven't seen anything yet. Everything can be ransomed. In 2 years' time, you'll be ransomed, so you can't get into your house, for instance, stuff like that. So ransomware, well, that's the future. Yeah, I hope I answered your question. Yeah, anything else? All right. Thank you for your time. If you have any questions or you need input to whatever you need to do in your own situation, come talk to me. I'll stick around until tomorrow evening. And I'm even on Twitter. And I've set up a special custom URL to the full slide set because I had 3 times as many slides. So I decided to cut them. So maybe there's something in there that you can use. Yep. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.